start with you.
Yeah.
Put you on the spot.
Okay. Well, my name is Adam, and my PhD is very 18th century periodicals, and it's about how politeness can be used to convey extraordinary acts of political violence.
My name is Jess, and I'm looking at how readers construct fictional consciousness using sort of cognitive linguistic.
My name's Emily, and my work is on how contemporary writers write about different kinds of bodies in relation to the future.
I'm Niasha, and I've sort of been researching imperial history, which has kind of been left out, which is looking at house music in black communities in northern cities in the 80s.
Andy, looking at the blues in non-anglophone contexts.
I'm Ella. I'm looking at some creative non-fiction relating to the Holocaust, and then Israel and Palestine, so some film in that. I'm Loe, and I'm looking at the writing of contemporary theatre practice and to see how image and marginal aspects are more centralised in the focus of performance.
Going on to the back, sorry.
I'm Rosa, and I'm looking into how elite politicians linguistically frame inequality through the cosmic thread.
Sorry.
I'm Bridget, looking at teenage girls listening to pop music and how it connects to identity.
I'm Vicky. I'm working on a project working with people with bowel disease and looking at that and stigma and their identities.
I'm Andrew. I'm doing some research on a type of bagpipe, the Northumbrian small pipes, and how it's connected with particular places in Northumberland. That seems to me quite a potentially visual topic, so I was interested in presenting it visually.
Brilliant. Wow, that's such a wealth of material. I might just leave now and make 15 films about all of these topics. The thing that's really interesting for me is that everyone kind of face lit up when you're talking about your own work, and as someone who also works on projects that I get really obsessed by, I think there's some similarities. And yesterday when I was thinking about what I would sort of talk about to start with, I was thinking about maybe the similarities between working as a filmmaker or an artist and maybe working as a researcher. One of them being that you dedicate a lot of time to a single topic. So that becomes your, well for me, like if I'm going to start a new project about a particular topic or a story, I just get really obsessed with it, and I find it really hard to remember that not everyone else knows about this or is as obsessed with it as I am. Also, I find it quite hard to talk about my work and explain it to other people, and I came to the storytelling workshop a few weeks ago, and the man who ran that came out of that workshop that people found it hard to communicate the idea or the story. And for me, I think, well, if I could do that, then I would make films and take photographs. So I struggled to explain my ideas as well. Also, I collect a mountain of material and records, photographs, video about a topic or about a subject, and then I have all of this material and have to sift through it and make something out of it. So in a way, maybe there's some parallels between research and maybe writing up a journal or giving a talk in that, and that you have to let go at some point and finish and do something with what you have and leave some of it behind. Kill your darlings, as I was taught in art school. So I think there's a few parallels. And for me, why I like working with film and photography is because it's immediate. You get immediate results. I think it's really accessible. It's a very democratic art form because anybody can do it more or less nowadays. It's very cheap as well, and I just get really excited by people wanting to share their lives and people treasuring memories through images, with family albums or Super 8 family films, and even now with Instagram and lots of online sharing activities, people genuinely want to share and document their lives, and maybe it's just their tea, but I don't know, I think there's something quite sort of beautiful and rich in that everybody sort of does it on a daily basis. So I was just going to tell you a little bit about my work and how I kind of came around to getting into photography and film. So I actually started off doing a geography degree here in Sheffield and was fascinated by people and places, to put it quite simply. And as I went through my degree, I realised that I was getting more and more interested by the photographs that were in the books that I was reading as part of my study on cities and urban environments. And then went to an exhibition by William Klein, who photographed New York in the 50s and 60s. And those images just like leapt out at me because I'd been reading all about theories. And then suddenly there's all of this in one picture. And so that kind of focused my own research at that time as an undergraduate into representation of cities. And after that I went to art college to study photography, and then kind of moved more into film as I realised that my camera could also shoot film as well as take still pictures. And with this project, YOSA, which is a project with a researcher here at Sheffield and Chinese students, I started using film a bit more, and I just really enjoyed the process of having the camera and sort of daily life unfolding in front of it, and it was just quite a kind of therapeutic, I suppose, in a way, just to watch something happening through the lens. It really interested me. So since then I started using film more as a method as well. And that's led to some quite interesting projects over the last few years, one of which was working with a Pakistani women's group in Sheffield, and this was more of a participant-led project. So they went out with cameras and audio recorders and interviewed their friends and family members and shopkeepers that they knew, and together we created a story about the Pakistani community in Sheffield, which was kind of driven by their research. So it was collaborative in a way, and they were co-researchers. And the best thing about this for me is that it was their story and they had the unique access. So it was really fascinating, the stories that we could find together, and the stories that they realised they already had within the group and within the community. And some of the projects I've done, I worked a lot with researching community heritage, which is another project here at Sheffield. Some have been myself working as a filmmaker with a researcher, and some have been with some undergraduate students as well. So this one was about the Healy History Workshop, which is a local history group that meet in Healy once a week. And I did the filming and the photographs, and helped to sort of train some undergraduates to use the audio recorders and record some stories or oral histories which we combined to make the film. So my plan was that I was going to show this piece and then show a little bit of another film which is working with music researchers about jazz festivals, and then the final one is a piece where I worked with a researcher and we created a film sort of using the introduction I had on here was filmmaking and research, filmmaking as research. So with the last piece, the process was more that filmmaking became a way of researching. So I thought if I just showed them one by one, and after each one we could maybe have a short discussion, and if you start to think about the ingredients in each film as well, that might be quite useful to think, what do you actually need to make a film, like a shopping list kind of thing. So I will play this one, I'll set it up, and then I might go and turn the lights off so you can see a bit better. And we've got these ancient speakers, so I hope it's alright.
It is a social gathering, yeah. There is a structure, it's so loose though. It's so diverse, there's people talking across the table to one another. Lillian occasionally tries to get order. There's people saying all sorts of things. It's wonderful, absolutely wonderful.
I enjoyed coming and learning more about Healy, And I feel as though I've come back to my roots, even though they're not my roots, they're my dad's roots. My granddad is on the back row. He's the second from the left. His name was Francis Carr, and he was a local painter and decorator. And he had a wallpaper shop on Gleelas Road, number 252. I think, but I'm not 100% certain, that my dad is in the photograph, and my uncle, my dad's brother.
I could always run distance. The Boys Brigade took the torch. I don't know from where to where, but it was certainly all the way across England. We did about 5-6 miles, and I carried it with 2 others from Unston to Chesterfield. Yeah, it was quite an occasion. I was proud to do that.
I joined the group in 1982, and I'm chair and have been for quite a long time now. All of us have some interest in Healy. Some people used to live in Healy, and some people had parents or grandparents who lived in Healy. In some way, they've got a connection. That is why they come to the group. We spend our time either researching family history or researching people that have lived in Healy and people that have worked in Healy and the sort of workplaces that have been there.
This writing about the map, Lower Healy, Healy Bottom, was on London Road, not at Artisan View. It was along London Road. And this Healy Bridge, picture 11, should be Healy Bridge Inn. All right.
The photograph I'm looking at now is one of my father in front of the greenhouse with his dog Bob. I would presume he's around 14 years old because he's in his Scouts uniform, the famous bathing pal hat. This, according to my sister Janet, was something that she used to try and play with a child. My father used to get annoyed at times, but that's obviously well into the 1950s.
I thought I'd bring a few pieces of memorabilia from the last probably 70 or 80 years. The collection that I've got there were probably started about 10-15 years ago. Sheffield itself has always been involved in the cutlery trade from the early 1800s onwards. I did have an uncle who lived on Neely Green, just lower down, who had a fish and tattle shop, and he was classed as a little master, and he ground table knives and things like that. There's a bit of nostalgia attached to it, but also it's amazing that interest and all those companies have now gone. And if we haven't collected any of that information, we probably would have nothing on record, would we? No.
I never thought history would be interesting to me, but it is now. That's part of my life.
Sid's an excellent researcher. He does it his way.
I do it the cheap way.
Yeah.
Don't cost me any money.
That's right.
I'm good at local history. I know Healy. Back of me hand. You do come for the company.
I'm sure most of them come to the group not just because they lived locally or had ancestors that lived locally. I mean, that's the reason why they say they'll come. But it's the social fellowship here. When I plan what I'm doing, if we're getting another book ready, then I still allow some time for everybody just to talk so that you get the social fellowship, you know, yeah. It does make a difference, you know.
Okay, so what did you learn from that film? What does it tell you? What do you say? Yes.
I thought it was interesting how it seemed to be more about the idea of the people and the social fellowship than the actual heritage. I imagine it'd be quite easy to make a film, not easy, but easy to end up making a film about all the genealogy and all the history and all the stuff, but actually the focus was on the people and how important it is and that idea of social fellowship at the end, which is more interesting to watch as well.
Right, yeah. So as someone, I don't know if you have any relationships or connection to Healy, but if it was all about Healy, then the audience is quite limited, isn't it, to people who either have got a connection there or might want, maybe moving there or something like that. So certainly by drawing, I suppose, on more sort of general themes and relationships that we can all feel a connection to is something that can help reach a wider audience. Yeah. In terms of the actual ingredients, if you think of what is in the film, like really basically what is in the film. I think this is really simple, but it doesn't list them.
It's all based on interviews.
Yeah, so there's interviews, there's audio interviews.
Yeah.
Do we hear the interviewer's voice?
No.
So the subjects or the participants are given they're given the, I don't know the right word, but they're the important thing. It's about them. So how would you do that as an interviewer? Been on done all histories before, or?
I guess you want to frame questions that have got quite open answers, so that it's not really obvious that people are people aren't responding to leading questions in a really kind of obvious way.
Yeah.
You need to pose questions that are going to just produce a response.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And there may be some situations where the interviewer is part of the research, in which case you film more of the conversation, and I think that would be all right. But here, I think because we were really keen to make it about them, we didn't want to have other voices in there. It's just to focus purely on them. You have to lead the audience to what you want them to see and hear very deliberately.
I suppose as well they're a group that are quite, they're there to talk about that thing, so quite used to having conversations about it.
Yeah, they're passionate about that, aren't they? And they're passionate about their knowledge and their interests. They're the experts, they're local experts, and they're very happy to share that, willing to give that. But I think, what don't we hear about in terms of the audio? What don't we know? Do we know any of their names? Do we know any of their personal details? So we don't really know them, but we feel like we know them. So it's sort of giving them a little bit of anonymity in a way. So you don't always have to know everything about someone, but the sense of their connection comes across still. What were the visuals that we see?
It was a mix of live action and stills.
Yeah.
Interesting assets. Most. I don't know. You tell me about it.
I guess
lots of sources.
Yeah.
Lots of historical sort of.
Yeah, so there's details. I would think of it as detailed shots, and you might think of it as artifacts or objects, or like a close-up as well, you could call it. So as well as there being things, tangible things that we see, that also helps break up the visuals, because it's not all filmed from a wide angle and that's all that you see. You have to kind of go between different angles, different types of shot. So we also see like the interaction between people, which you mentioned, and the I guess what you called live action, which I think they'd love. I love that. They can tell live action at Healy
Live
History
action
Group. Yeah, no, I know.
film.
Just I work with animation and all that sort of thing. So
Yeah.
And this kind of observational documentary, I suppose you could call it. But that's what's happening anyway. There wasn't a director involved. That's as it was. So there may be things that are part of your research that you've attended that are people doing things that it's interesting to watch for people who know nothing about it anyway. So then, like you say, it comes back to the social fellowships. We see them chatting about whatever, car parking or something. But that's just part of their life, so that comes across, I think, without it being force-fed. Are there any other comments about?
I like the opening shot. That's like every community centre and village hall everywhere in the country. And it's quite still about it. Just introduces it.
Yeah. So you could call that an establishing shot. So it gives you an idea of the space, of the location, where it is. But But again, if I was to ask you to go and find that, would you do that? No, so it's nothing that tells you the location. There's no Google map to start and like a nice big zooming in from outer space. But you feel like you know where it is.
So that's what, 5 minutes long. How long did you spend out for that film? Did you just go and see one?
Yeah, they met every Monday afternoon from 1 till 4, I think it was, and I think it probably attended 4 or so afternoons. And some of the audio was done by students who were part of the project as well, so they would go off into a quieter room and film and record some of the audio.
How long did the editing take?
That's a good question. A little while. I think I would say like for every day of shooting there's at least another day of editing. So yeah, it can be time consuming. Yeah.
What do you make it on?
Technically speaking, I use a program called Final Cut Pro, but there are some sort of editing software available that are cheaper and easier and more straightforward, which I could show you an example of one later. Yeah.
And do you film it on what do you use to film?
I use a DSLR camera, so it's one with the lens in the front you can take off and change the lenses. So because I work as a stills photographer as well, so it's the same camera for that. And I would recommend using a DSLR camera rather than a video camera. The lens quality is a little bit better and it's still portable, and also you have the added benefit of being able to take stills on it as well. Yeah. Yeah, so for this one, the audio, in fact all 3 that I'm going to show, the audio was recorded separately, so the audio is never coming through the camera. So with the interviews, that gives you a bit more of a sort of different method in a way, because you've not got the camera with someone, you can sit next to them and it can feel more like a conversation. So like you mentioned, the open questions, it can come across a bit more relaxed and people a bit more willing to give their story, I suppose. But the next one I'm going to show, you'll see, has interviews in it, so it's more staged in a way. I'm not going to play all of this one because it's quite long, but I'll show you the introduction and then a little bit towards the end as well.
On the Connected Communities programme, what we've got a real focus on is collaborative research. That's precisely what it's about. Instead of academics sitting in their studies or their offices, reading their own books and writing their own materials and having their own thoughts and research questions, we want to take academics out into community contexts. And also we want the research questions to be raised, to be explored, constructed, interrogated by partners outside universities in the first instance, and then have academics coming along and helping, people answer those what to them are very useful research questions. And that whole process of knowledge exchange, of co-production, is a really exciting one at the moment within academic work in Britain. And the AHRC is funding lots and lots of projects around that. And the particular emphasis here we've got is around how academics can work in their research with organisations from the creative economy. In this instance, it's us, a group of jazz scholars and popular music scholars, working with jazz festivals.
Well, I think it's very important. I really admire the work that has been done in research into jazz, sort of documenting the history of the music, audience research, and then just looking at the history and the influence of certain musicians. Jazz has a massive tradition now, and I think it's good that we document that history of the music.
I'm Ian George and I'm the Cheltenham Jazz Festival Director. Cheltenham Jazz Festival first started in 1996 and was regarded as kind of leading jazz festival in the kind of jazz circles. It started out as a venue-based festival. We did about 10,000 tickets in the early years. And in the last 5 or 6 years, the festival has expanded out into the town. It's become more of an traditional outdoor festival. We now do around 20,000 tickets a year. It's over 6 days in the May Bank holiday and is well known in jazz circles, but also now in the broader music scene. Working with the Arts and Humanities Research Council, it'll actually be our debut working with the Research Council, so it's something we're very excited and interested in. For 2014 we're doing a series of talks. We're looking at things such as heritage. One of the cross-festival themes that we have at the Cheltenham Festivals is memory. So we actually tied that into looking at heritage, and obviously very relevant to jazz. It allows us to add a kind of intellectual and academic element to a talk that we may not have had before.
As part of this particular AHRC project, the idea of looking at some of the black British performers, that's planted an idea, and we've gone back to programming Dennis Baptiste and his Let Freedom Ring suite, which was originally commissioned by Cheltenham Jazz Festival, I think it was 10 years ago, and that was one of our most successful commissions. And so the idea...
I'm just going to fast forward it a little bit. There's an interesting, very animated man.
I'm John Cumming. I'm one of the 3 directors of Sirius, who are the producers of the EFG London Jazz Festival, which happens in November every year, and is 22 in 2014. We expanded what was a festival in the local borough of London, Camden, into a London-wide event with I suppose with a number of different aims. One was to celebrate the fact that this is a 365-day-a-year jazz city, where jazz has occupied an extremely important part of the cultural landscape and not just the music landscape, but also because of its ability to cross generations and cross cultural backgrounds. It connected with many different communities within the city, so part of the original vision was to celebrate that, actually.
So London, we started at the beginning with a panel, a public engagement event during the 2010 Jazz Festival, which was actually on the value of jazz festivals themselves. We dubbed it Why Festivals Matter.
I'm going to stop that one there. I think you can imagine the rest of it is quite similar. So this one was produced, I suppose, for the audience. It was produced for a conference, so that it was part of their stand at a Creative Economy Showcase. So the audience was, there were some local MPs, academics, and researchers. So for me, I made it, so I've watched 15 minutes of it, but had I not made it, I probably wouldn't have watched for that long, just personally speaking. But so this is, I suppose the audience is very different, but it's a different way of sort of conveying their research. Does it feel much different to the first film that we watched?
Yeah, because there's a burden to communicate content with this one that there never was with the history of the project. That's kind of made a difference. And then we're being introduced properly, and then working through kind of look from a logical storyline rather than a kind of experiential sense of thing.
Yeah. What do you think as a music researcher?
I have no comment to make. Sorry. I was enjoying it. I was just sort of a bit disappointed you stopped it.
It's online.
Is it? Okay, right. I'll watch it later.
Yeah.
There's not very much music in it. There's background music, but it's not really music.
Yeah. So if we think of the ingredients then for this one, what is there in that? What would you have to make something with? If you had the footage of this one, there's the interviews. Is there anything else?
Have you used the archive footage, or is it all you?
Yeah, there was some archive footage. Yeah, so there was the video bit that was from some of the jazz festivals previous years. Yeah.
Different location shots.
Yeah. So it's all interviews. So had they all been filmed in the same place in their offices? You know, there's a mixture of jazz festival organisers and academics, but there isn't any interviews in a person's office. So thinking about that, if you've got more interview-based stuff, try and change the location a bit to keep it a bit fresher, and you can play with the location to give away a little bit about someone's character. So he's a music academic. This is his office at home. So we'd find out so much more about him from that. then had you been filmed here?
I like to think all music academics have got a maraca just within using just in case. Yeah.
I like that
true?
first quote as well. It starts on his face, doesn't it? So you just think, oh, here's a lecturer in academics and it tells what to think, and then that shot reveals sort of the chaos. And he's talking about academia and jazz, isn't he? The two meetings. So I thought, in terms of conveying exposition with more than words, I thought it was really good. In the first one, I thought it was interesting. I thought it was quite a complicated moment where the president was explaining to some students, was she sort of identifying places from the past for them or something like that?
Oh, it's and the Healy one.
Yeah.
When she's talking about.
And she sort of said, "This is this," but I thought actually that's quite a complex scenario.
Right.
And there wasn't much to go on, but I completely knew what was going on. So how little exposition you need to tell a story, I thought was interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
I suppose that comes down to editing though, and the squeeze as well.
Yeah, it can do, but you can direct in a way if you have to think what have you already got. Like you can do. I keep going on about the shopping list, but that's what I would do before I start filming a project or photographing a project. And what do I actually need in terms of the shots, and then you could go and start to build something, and then if you're lucky, you've got the opportunity to go back and get extra bits. So that's the nice thing about working on something longer, like the Healy project, being able to go back another week and get a bit of additional footage. But with this sort of thing, it's very much like they're very busy people, so you've got an hour to go and do do the interview pretty much. But yeah, I suppose this one, the production values are a bit higher, and the audio recording's clearer, just in terms of the equipment that I was able to use for this one. And also it's a 2-camera setup for the interview, which is quite rare, I would say, unless you work in the industry already. But it's something that you could think about, or if you were doing an interview with someone, you could do it on more than one day. Then you just need to be careful with continuity as well. There's just really the interviews for this, the archive footage, and then there was some old posters and flyers that we could use as material. But those were also materials that the researchers used, so it's quite nice to use those as well in a visual way. Okay. Did anyone, in terms of I know when George started talking about knowledge exchange and transfer, and would you say, from the 2 films that we've seen already, what would you say about that in relation to how the knowledge is conveyed or shared? Do you feel?
I think maybe some people might actually find it easier to learn from the first style, because it's a bit more kind of emotive and it's a bit more kind of like kind of a creative narrative in some ways, whereas this is a bit more like just focusing on what they're saying, and they speak quite fast, and it's about topics that they're very familiar with. So it's kind of like you can tell that this is for different audiences.
Yeah.
It's just quite didactic, I suppose.
Right.
I think the knowledge exchange direction is quite different between the two. Like in this one, it's very specific knowledge exchange between two specific kind of groups of people, whereas the other one is more kind of from a community with different personalities to appealing to more kind of general human interest histories and stories, I think.
Yeah.
So this is much more kind of this knowledge exchange of something more specific.
Yeah.
They kind of got more of a purpose, like for what they're saying and how they're trying to influence the people that are going to be watching. Whereas the other thing, they don't seem to be sort of really thinking about how it's going to be watched or received. They're just kind of being more natural.
Yeah. I feel with this one we're being told something, and the other one you sort of discover a little bit on your own. So there's no right or wrong way. It's interesting to think what's the result as the audience. What effect does those two styles have on the audience?
Is it also, these people in the jazz thing have got quite possibly a sort of a commercial agenda. You know what I mean? Where's the money, Lebowski? You know what I'm talking about? So this guy, probably doesn't always wear his handkerchief sticking out his top pocket like that, And the other people don't always sit in swanky London cafes, doing interviews. But they've got to sell their festival, haven't they? Whereas the Healy History Group, they don't have to sell anything. They're just interested in what they're doing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So this was produced for the Creative Economy Showcase. So it's pretty much.
So it's more stagey, and that's that heads
yeah,
the higher
in some
production
ways.
values and, you know, everything.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Are there any more comments before we watch a third piece?
Do you choose, most of them when they're talking, they're not looking into the camera. Is that something you choose, or is that just to do with the setup of the interviews and things?
Yeah, it depends on, first of all, the client, if it's a commercial piece of work. If, in terms of how it comes across, if someone's talking to the camera, it would have more of a presenter style, which may be something that is required. In this case, they wanted it to be more of a conversational piece, so it had that feeling that I think they use it quite a lot in sort of documentaries on TV as well. People talking about something that may have happened already, so you can't. They're reflecting on it in a way. So it's an engaged interview, but not with direct eye contact to the camera.
So how do you make? Sorry, I was just going to say, how do you make that work? Because is there something you direct people to look at, or because if people have I'm surprised you don't have people there.
Oh, they're looking at the interview. The camera's just right next to them.
So if they're looking at you.
Yeah. In this case, I was sitting here. So yeah, the setup was that, say if I was filming you, I'd have two cameras, set the cameras up first, and then have the chair either myself or somebody else who was basically just going. A lot of body language to encourage them, and in some cases.
And it's really important that you keep looking at them, because if you like look away, you can see it in their reactions. Like, their eye contact, or they feel like you're not interested in what they're saying.
Yeah. But that can also be a useful technique if you're doing just audio stuff and someone goes off on a tangent and you've got to be a bit strict about it, because you can just use it. But in the same way as when you're having a conversation with someone, you're quite aware when the other person has become not as interested anymore. So those are techniques you can use to redirect somebody towards not what you want them to say necessarily, but towards the thing that you're interested in.
I was going to say, I suppose if you've got a lot of different interviewees, it's going to look quite weird if they're all addressing the camera directly, because it kind of, looking straight at the camera kind of implies control over the narrative. You can't have that when it's all different people in sequence, just it's a bit scrambled.
Yeah, and I think you'd only really have one person that does that, maybe giving an introduction to something. Yeah, it could be, as a viewer it's confusing, isn't it? Yeah. Okay, should we watch the last one? This one was made with a researcher, so the two of us went to this township in the Lake District, just north of the National Park. I'll play it and then we'll talk more about it afterwards.
It's just a great place to live, good neighbours, everybody seems to get on, all prepared to help each other if there's a problem. But we don't live in each other's pockets, it's just, they're there if you need anything, which is about as good as it gets, I would think, as a community. I know sometimes you get a bit pissed off with it, things aren't going right, and you can't see how it's going to happen, but you still have a really nice place to work, which a lot of people would kill for.
January 1776, Friday the 26th. Frost gets a fire, but not much snow. Covered at about 2 inches. Cattle can't get very much in fields, I'll have to feed them. Finished laying today. Got about 16 ridges set in croft. Gear rank, a week next crop.
We're pretty limited in our options up here. We're on marginal land, weather being what it's like. We grow grass, that's the best thing we can grow. We're relatively moist, and when you grow grass you farm livestock. If you look after your livestock, they'll look after you. Yeah.
If you hadn't decent grass growth, nothing else follows. Nothing you can buy on a wagon, supplementary feed, drenches, anything like that, all supplement sunshine and grass.
August 1777, Sunday the 24th, at a meeting. It came on very great storm and flood, much wet before I got home. The greatest flood here that hath been for several years. Monday 25th, weather wet and stormy. Did not get to Cockermouth. Here in many places washed away by floods, or almost covered with water up on the ground.
Up until the bad summer, I think it was 84, I might be wrong, we always seem to manage to get enough hay. Now that seems to have gone, running faster to go backwards sort of things. I mean, there'd be some years the quality wouldn't be as good, but we always seem to manage to get barns full of hay to feed stock. Things are getting harder for the smaller type of farms. When Dad was coming in, he could afford to pay somebody to work for him. I mean, I didn't get a lot, when I was working at home, but things didn't cost as much then, so, you could carry on. It's a cost, all our costs have gone up. Diesel, electric, fertiliser, everything's got much more expensive. Whereas livestock, over the years, it's been kind of held back by the supermarkets, and they've got a big hold on, they say what they've got to give, and that's it, you see. I mean, Dad was there, we were milking 30 cows, we had about 180 breeding ewes, and we were making a profit. Nowadays you'll be fined for only milking that number of cows. So I think nowadays it's a lot about size and numbers.
(1784). Sowed the first oats stinkeld on the 2nd of the 4th month. A very considerable snow on the 11th, and a great addition the night following. Snow daily, and a thick cover on the 15th. Husbandry suspended. Distressing for the poor lambs, just at the height of lambs dropping. I had 2 last night. Rain, hail or snow almost daily. A thick cover and hard frost on the night of the 27th. I did not see a blade of oats before the 23rd, nor one pea until about 6 weeks after setting. First heard the cuckoo on the 2nd of the 5th month, though I have not yet seen one thorn leaf. Exceeding back spring, did not see one thorn leaf before the 6th of the 5th month. This year, the hawthorns and the blackthorns have been really late, and the hawthorn flowers have been incredibly late.
We would normally look at a 7-month winter for cattle inside. This last year we had a 9-month winter. That's another 60 days you've got to feed them birds.
We used to get wet weather like 20 years back, but you didn't get as much in one day. You seem to get more in one day now than you got maybe in a week.
The last 12 months, weather-wise, has been diabolical. We had a very wet summer last summer. Water table was at the top. Anything that fell on it had to run off it. It just couldn't take anymore, and it had a bumper effect.
I've never seen sheep as hungry in my life. We went to feed. I had 2 bunches of ewes with lambs in fields next to each other. I went in to feed one bunch, the other field full, came running across that fast and didn't stop at the fence. They just smashed through it. If we'd had another summer this year like we had last year, a lot of people out there would be finished. soon as I could hold a shovel, I was working. When we were, say, 5 or 6 little jobs you could do, so you did, and just carried on from there. Brought up with it, never wanted to do anything else, couldn't do anything else. It's like folks say, it isn't a job, it's a way of life. One of the biggest problems we have is the red tape. Now, it's serious. And a lot of it is thought up by somebody sitting in office in London that hasn't a clue what country life and farm's about. And they're trying to get stock off the fells, preserve it for walkers, but they don't realise it looks that good now because farmers have farmed it for generations. They take all this stock off, find out it's starting to grow rubbish. It'll be nothing but bracken and bramble and gorse. People can't walk on it. So they're going to start paying farmers to put stuff back on.
There was a time when people didn't like farmers because they had this idea that they were just,
rich.
Farmers were rich and didn't care about animals and all this kind of thing. But I think we're starting to realise now, you know, that we do care about animals, we do care about the countryside, and because of the work that farmers do, the countryside is as it is, and education is really important. Actually, I think farmers also need to learn to communicate better, but I think they're doing that as well. They're as bad as each other, you know, folk that were bloody farmers. The farmers were just as bad. They didn't like people. They've had to become more open and let people in to see what's going on.
We don't like living on subsidies, but until we get a realistic price of what we're selling, we've got to.
Wednesday the 12th. Weather very sharp. The frost got into the houses. Froze the piss in the pots under the beds. Some potatoes frosted in the houses. I can remember when we were kids up here, when we come home from school, process was you took your school clothes off, you got your work clothes on, you went down and you all had little jobs, you went and did hens and fed dogs and mucked wire out and that sort of thing. And James got rather wet. When he went to bed, just laid them on lying on the floor. And frost got it. When he picked them up next morning, they were like cardboard, like this was inside the house, like.
Mum and Dad got married, come here in 1947, one of the really bad winters. There was always plenty of kids in that up here. They always like to come up the fellside for summer holidays and this was my sister feeding two pet lambs. My dad bought a little Shetland pony, and when they went out next morning, he did it fall. But they didn't know it was actually in fall, you see, so this would be the surprise he got next morning. Like.
What the biggest change I've noticed, all these small farms, when I was a lad, all had families on them.
It used to be that you were a person of quite a high standing in the community if you were a farmer and respected, but now all you do is people move into the house next door and they don't want the smell, they don't want the noise through night, and you just get hassled like all the time. Early 80s up until 1996, this would be when the farming was really flying. It was good to be in farming then, but now it's so tight, it's just hand to mouth all the time with it.
Farming goes around in 20-year cycles. There's 6 or 7 years, it's alright. It's on the up. There's 5 or 6 years you'll make a lot of money, and then there's another 5 or 6 years you make nothing. You lost money, and then it levels off, and then it starts to pick up. Hopefully we're on our way up. Hopefully.
We should never give up. No, just keep going. Onwards and upwards.
Right, so that was probably a little bit different again. Any feedback about that one or any comments to make?
It's beautiful. It's really nice. I loved how like still it was, like the shots that was just like still, and because that's what I guess like film would be like to be there, and like there's no music or anything, just really like minimal. I like that.
It's quite slow paced, isn't it?
Yeah.
No talking heads at all. You didn't see any of the speakers, did we?
No.
Didn't really see any cues.
No.
Yeah, there's the you see the one farmer in the tractor and the mule, and then there's the just a little bit bringing the sheep in. Do you feel like you know a little bit about that place now? So what do we see in terms of like the shopping list again? What are the visuals? There's the landscape shots that you mentioned. What else are the like materials?
The letters are some letters like red.
Yeah, you see there's like the double exposure where you can see some of the text. Yeah, so that, I don't know if you know, there were no readings, you notice they're reading from the diary, so that was the actual diaries that they were reading from. So from the 18th century diaries. Are there any other sources, I suppose we could call them? There's just the film footage of the locations, so there's a lot about the place and it's in there visually.
I guess the footage of the animals, the sheep.
Yeah.
Well, the sheep.
Yeah, so working on the land, you get a sense of people living and working there. Yeah. And then there's a bit of the kind of archive footage, the photographs.
Oh yeah.
The black and white images. And then the picture of the farmer when he was younger in the field. When we went to show it to them back in Cumbria, all the others were like, wee!
It was quite good looking.
So yeah, this one was a really nice project because we went there and filmed it only in a week really, but Toby, the researcher I'd worked with, had been there a few times before because he wrote his PhD about these diaries and about the landscape and weather and climate in that place. So he'd met some of them before briefly because he'd had to ask for access to go onto the fields. So we're quite, well for me it's quite fortuitous because when we went there he already had the connections, so people were quite happy to speak to us, I suppose.
I thought it was one kind of factor of using their voices so heavily was how sort of distinct the accents were. I loved it when he went cow with yow, that was great.
Yows.
And I guess that does provide a really strong sense of place in a way that's quite implicit.
Yeah.
One of them sounded a bit like Anthony Hopkins.
Really?
The deep one,
Yeah. I'll pass that on.
In character.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
I liked the fact that there was some sort of political message, but that came quite late really, and it started, very tranquil, and that tranquility carried on. It was still there, but there was sort of, people, somebody said, people down in London just got no idea, and they don't understand. And you really got a sense of that actually, because it can go straight into that.
Yeah. So there's many. When we finished making this, and we came back and we kind of wrote a list of things that we want to do because we're trying to get some funding or work on it further for a longer period of time to go back again. And there's so many things that we could do. there's almost too many. It's very easy to get carried away. And with this one, I think because the filmmaking process became a means of research in itself as well. So as we were doing it, we kind of found out more and more interesting things. One of them is the accents. They've all got really different accents, and these are four male voices, and the 4 working farms that are still working in that particular area. And so they don't live really, really far away, but actually their accents are quite unique. And then, yeah, I mean, there's one of the farms, his son is going to take over, but the other 3, there isn't anyone.
I was wondering because when he was talking about himself as a young, like as a child working, sort of wondering whether there was an implication there about what was going to happen afterwards.
Yeah, there's a lot of sort of areas of research that you can go back to, and anyone could, spend a lot of time there and find all these sort of interesting and
climate change as well.
Yeah.
Being wetter.
Yeah. So Toby had written his PhD, like I said, about the landscape and the climate and weather at the time of the diaries, and so we asked the people in there to read the diaries, and then the rest of it is really just recorded conversations, and then reflecting on what was in the diaries and talking about the present day.
Did they think the diaries were interesting?
Some of them were familiar with them already, because I think a historian had.
There's just loads of historians tramping around the lakes trying to get farmers to read diaries from the 18th century. Okay.
There was and someone had translated one of the diaries and done a talk about it. They have a discussion group that meets, I think, once a month or something, farmers discussion group, and this historian had been there. So now they want to show the film in the discussion group. But they said it's interesting because they have people who've moved there now, that are living in the holiday homes pretty much, that come to the group as well and share their concerns. So they really want to show the film to the group. So the techniques some were similar to the Healy thing with the audio recordings, and then just some quite kind of very filmic techniques in terms of recording the landscape on a static frame on a tripod, which technically is quite straightforward to do as well. Are there any other parts of that film that were interesting or?
I really like the bit with the tractors. I just saw a really nice shot when they came through.
When the people there watched it, they were like, oh, bloody hell, look at all that grass going off the edge of the track. It's interesting the things that they picked out that we haven't really thought about.
But I like that they sort of, kind of made beauty out of something that people wouldn't normally think to necessarily consider in that way. So
yeah.
Similarly, I like the dust settling after the tractor turns into the fields.
I think film and photography can reveal things about the everyday that you might not notice yourself. So it's like if you go on holiday, as myself as well, I just want to take those nice photographs. If I just walk around the block in my house, because it's new, so sometimes having a fresh pair of eyes on something or trying to think about it in a different way can be quite revealing, and that's quite interesting in itself. When we went, I'll show you a quick picture of when we went to show it up there, and they in one of their kitchens, and the bit where the signpost came on, they're like, oh my god, so you must go past that every day. We were delighted that they liked it, they enjoyed it, and we've just sent some copies up to them as well. So the ideal plan is that we go back to do some more filming there. And for Toby as well, I will speak on his behalf, it's kind of opened up his potential avenues of research as well, the sort of things that he's becoming more interested in now as a researcher. Okie dokie. Do you want a short break, or you? Okay. The next bit I was going to go through some sort of quick tips of photography and film stuff and audio techniques, some of which we've covered already, and then suggest that we have a go at doing a film pitch as well. Would you like a little break first? Okay, we'll keep going. Okay. So I think in terms of some very quick tips. I wouldn't say go if you want to make something yourself, I definitely don't recommend going and spending lots and lots of money on equipment that is just going to be something that you may only use once. So think about what's available and affordable. There may be places, there are places you can hire equipment from as well. In terms of the framing and the visual side of things, these I hope will be useful just for daily recordings and using photography and film just for yourself as much as for research purposes. So composition wise, how do you frame something? I always think before I start filming of how I would take it as a photograph. So using the space, moving around, it's when you get a piece of equipment and you want to start doing something, it's very exciting. When I've worked with children before, they just get really excited and there are hundreds and hundreds of pictures, which is great. But you need to focus the mind, move yourself as well before you start asking people to move. If you're filming something like the shots we saw of the interviews, everything was quite as the eye sees, so being careful with lines, keeping everything quite straight, using available light as well as much as possible. It'd be quite awkward. This room is a nightmare, would be a nightmare to film in or photograph in because of the lights. I'm a bit obsessive, and as soon as I go somewhere, ooh, I know what settings I have the camera on. And I'm pulling these blinds up to let the natural light in. So work with what's available, and then again you don't have to start worrying about spending lots of money on equipment. We mentioned, I think, a little bit about the different types of shot that were in the films as well. So you mentioned, I think, the opening scene of Healy when you saw people sort of coming in and there's the window, and that would be like the establishing shot. We could say a lot of the the images from the last film were all about the establishing shots. They were all about the location, but also there were a couple of details there as well. So the establishing or environmental shot can give away information about a place, a location, and the detail gives more of that and more of a sense of the character or the personality and something unique about maybe the research. And then to try and show more of the relationship, whether it's relationship between people, interactions, or is it a relationship between people and the material, like a diary or some records. Is that the relationship?
Sorry, can I ask? I didn't quite follow what you meant by keep lines straight.
If in the, let me show you visual, hang on, sorry. So, for example, with the interview parts of this jazz film that we saw, setting up this took a surprising amount of time.
Because of all of his book.
Because if you look here, there are a lot of verticals.
To the edge of the frame.
Yeah, and we needed to keep it nice and straight, just so your eye doesn't get distracted.
Yeah, so verticals.
So does that also mean to sit someone in front of a wonky bookshelf and then?
Possibly. I mean, I think you need. It's without being really. I don't like rules or the idea of rules, and I think in photography, especially, maybe film as well, there's a lot of like, the rule of thirds, and you must conform to this composition, but you don't really. But just if you want people to focus on what's happening, not what's not right. You don't want people to get distracted. So just keeping. If it's a structured building, for example, trying to keep lines as straight as possible. Are there any more questions about that? And with the audio, we have mentioned a few of these already. We're using open questions, finding a quiet place. So this room, for example, turn the projector off, you hear that whirring, that would be recorded as well. And often there are things that you don't hear that you would hear if you use headphones, so it's quite useful to have headphones as well for audio recordings. Again, body language, head nodding, just agreeing with physical movements rather than if that's the effect that you want, then you want to remove your own voice. You have to be very encouraging. And try and get a sense of emotion. Those were a couple of questions that the students from Healy used as prompts as well, to try and get more of the memory, more of a sense of the feelings as well. sure if this might be useful as well if anyone's working with sort of more historical material. So if you've got, for example, we just have the diaries, so to start with, that on its own isn't really enough to make a film from, but if you start thinking about what are the connections to that material, what are the remnants of it, how could it be reimagined, how could you use it in different ways. And again, if you have non-visual or in some cases protected sources, you can use anonymity. You can film somebody without showing their face, or photograph someone without showing their face, using hands or close-ups. Or yesterday I was filming and one of the girls in the group didn't want to be seen, so I just made sure I was always behind her, or you could only just see part of her face, so people can still be involved in things, and it's important to respect their own decisions as well. And again, for this you could use more abstract visuals or more sort of reflective style of filming, like with the landscape shots, and then you make the audio the feature. So like you mentioned with the accents as well, I feel like we know the people quite well, or you get a sense of their character. If you think of radio documentaries or This American Life and a lot of other sort of audio-only storybooks even, that gives you a really rich thing to go on to start with. That could become the main feature, and then you use the visuals to support it as well. Are there any questions? Or can I help in any way? If anyone's thinking of doing something their own.
I was doing interviews for my research, and I've actually filmed some of the interviews, but the problem with mine is there isn't that much, source material, there's not that many photographs and stuff. So I'm trying to I don't want it to just be lots of interviews, because that would just be a bit kind of uninspiring. And there's a bit of footage, but I don't know whether I'll be able to necessarily include it or not, so I don't know. I mean, I suppose you're saying about abstract stuff, but I just wonder if you have any advice on what might be the way to tackle it.
Well, the people that you're interviewing, have they got any of their own photographs?
Not many of them do, unfortunately.
Right.
I mean, I haven't properly, tried to find out whether they know anyone who might have any, but it wasn't really about taking photos, that kind of felt like it attracted from the moment, and not everyone had cameras because they weren't necessarily well off enough to have cameras at that time. So, there really is. I mean, there are some photos. Probably say I've got access to about maybe about 10 altogether so far, but that's,
That could be enough. If people look longer at a photograph, I suppose someone's talking, you could generally keep a still image on the screen for 8 to 10 seconds.
Okay.
You can use some techniques like zooming in slowly to them and having a little bit of movement or just showing parts of the image, focusing on parts of it. I suppose, did they talk about venues at all, or locations?
Yeah, they do, but I mean, a lot of them are demolished, but I can go back to those sites.
Yeah, that might be interesting, because even if they're not there now, that's kind of shows the passing of time in itself, doesn't it, and how those changes in the physical environment or the built environment have happened as a result of, or that's why, the changes that have happened in the music, I don't know.
Yeah.
Anything that comes out in the interviews could be a trigger that you could follow up.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. There are image libraries online where you can buy images to use, but again, you might want to not have something that's, I don't know, a nightclub that's just not representative of what is, what it was like then.
Yeah, I mean, it's part of the reason why it's not been written about is because of its lack of documentation. So that's kind of interesting, and that's part of the whole reason I'm doing the research.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes people tackle that by having animation and stuff, but I don't know, that's not something I can do. I don't know what they're.
Or even having someone talking about just having the audio but showing what they're doing now, a little bit, just a domestic scene or something about where they live.
I like what they're wearing, someone who's probably like 19 and really glamorous and you're interviewing them now.
No, they're all like, what, when you mean when they were younger?
Yeah, you're kind of talking about about quite a nice contrast. Also, I'm really nosy about what people.
Yeah, or people have got, I don't know, like flyers or
there are some
anything
flyers.
like that, or ticket stubs cloakroom tickets or any of those sort of
Well, a lot of the nights were really, they're in kind of failing venues, because those are the only nights, venues that would host black music nights on the weekend, and just like trying to make money. So it wasn't really like, it were really cheap to get into it. So yeah, I mean, compared to like Acid House where there's so much, it's like completely different. But yeah, I just got to kind of be creative with the way that I can try and make it different.
What about like their kids and stuff? You could talk to them about.
Going
what
to
they
think,
think about the differences maybe, or what they think if they're old enough to have kids.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I'm sure we will. Yeah. That's true. So I don't want to talk about my thing for ages, so I can't get back to them.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I suppose like how to go about things is when you research on something that's quite far away from my daily experience and anything that I'm really know about. And it's also like very, very well documented. Like talk a bit about Holocaust documentary. I'm trying to write about Shoah at the moment, which obviously is massive. So I guess there's a, I don't know, just think a bit about how to get hold of that. On the one hand, there's quite a wealth of film responses, a lot of which would have fairly major copyright issues attached. So. And on the other hand, I don't really know anyone that I can go in and interview to talk about it, or not to talk about the more interesting things. I don't know. Yeah. Sorry, that's a bit vague.
I think that that is definitely a very well documented, but everything has been done before. Not, so everything's been seen before. The unique thing is your connection to it, or the people that you've discovered along the way as part of the research. That's what makes it unique and interesting. I think different. So yeah, it's about the storytelling, which I mentioned that as well. But it's about your connection to the research. Your passion for it is what's interesting. So then, should we look at the pitch thing? I was going to. There we go. So for this, I was going to suggest that we did it in 2 groups. So it's up to you if you want to do it that way and kind of come up with a pitch as a group for a picture research idea. It might be nice to have a bit of discussion together, I think. So if we do that, you could use somebody's research that's in the group, or you could come up with something completely new if you wanted to do that, but you're probably quite focused on your own stuff. So if you come up with a brief synopsis, so if you try and think how would you describe it to someone in the pub, which is something that I also try to do with my own projects, when you've got all of these different ideas going on. But right, when it comes down to it, what is it actually about? And that's a really hard thing to do, but it's incredibly useful to be able to do it. And then visually, what have you got? What could you film? What could you include? And what would the audio be that you've got to use as well? So do you want to do that if you split into 2 groups and have some discussions, and I'll come around and help out as well. We'll come up with a pitch and present it back to each other, and then we can all have a group discussion. Okay, I don't know if you want to divide yourselves.
I'm just going to come round and talk to you.
Okay, so how many is that? 5 and 6. Oh, yeah. Oh, okay, alright.